So what is a PSA tool? A PSA tool needs to be scalable. It needs to support our business processes. It needs to enable resources to complete their daily tasks. It needs to provide transparency to organizational metrics. It also needs to have standardization methodologies and processes. So no matter what tool you're looking at, whether you're looking to buy a tool, you have a tool, you're looking to change your tool, you're going to want to make sure that these tools are scalable. Because if you have 10 employees today, you might have 100 or 200 employees next year. And because you do something one way with those 10 employees, doesn't mean that that'll be the same way that you do it with those 100 employees. So you want to make sure that it has enough flexibility to last you as long as you need the tool to last you. So those are some of the things that you want to look at. And I apologize, my slide jumped there for a second. Some of the other things that you want to do while you want to have a PSA tool is it helps to standardize everything. You're no longer using Excel. You no longer have one person doing it this way and John doing it another way. You actually have everybody doing the same thing, having the same requirements with the same software. Software can benefit you with that information. The one thing to remember, though, is that the PSA solution might not handle everything that you need to handle. It's a PSA tool. It's not a support tool. It's not an accounting tool. It doesn't do everything out of the box that you need it to do. So you might be looking at a code approach to fix your unique need. You could also be looking at adding an app from the App Exchange. You could be doing a customization with a custom object. You could be adding all kinds of things to your PSA system. But some things to remember when adding extensions or expansions to your PSA system is that there's always pros and cons. So some of the things to think about in the con section. I like to do cons first, might as well get the bad out of the way before you go to the good, is that there's maintenance. So if you're writing code or if you're using an unmanaged package item, you need to make sure that you're keeping it well maintained because things can happen such as vendor software releases that could break your code. You never know down the road what your software provider might be putting in their code that could break yours. So that's why it comes to the next point, to make sure that you're testing your releases. So OpenAir, FinancialForce, Salesforce, all of them have releases. Some of those releases are push releases where you do not have an option. They're going to upgrade you on this date. While others have pull where you can say, I want to be on this date. But we highly recommend, no matter what, almost all of them give you access to your sandbox with that new functionality in it prior to going to production. So you want to test to make sure none of your business processes are broke or your customizations are broke because of the new improved features functionality that your PSA software company has now installed. You might want to take a look at historical data. Make sure that it hasn't changed. Make sure that create a new project. Go through your process from beginning to end to make sure that those changes are not affecting your system. Just because it didn't affect one piece doesn't mean that it's not going to have a trickle-down effect on your code in some other piece. The other thing is there's less reliancy on the actual PSA core solution. So we're kind of saying, well, it does this, but I need it to do this, so I'm just going to create this workaround. Sometimes workarounds aren't the best thing. So you need to look at that and say, is this what is best and beneficial for my company before expanding your PSA solution? Is this 100% necessary? If it's just because 2 people want it, is that really necessary, or could they do it some other way? Is there another solution? Is there an in-the-box solution that I could possibly use? Some of the pros about expanding your technology is it helps you to meet those requirements. Again, you want to make sure that that requirement is vetted. You're not just doing it for one individual or 2 individuals. It's actually helping the company as a whole. You want to make sure that nothing is impacting your company as a whole through the entire process. So if you have one department asking for something but not another, but they share the same system, make sure it works for both departments. The other thing is you have control over it. So if you do need to make changes, you can. Unlike managed package or managed software, you can't make changes to those. But if you have something that you've coded, you've customized, you can actually make those changes. It can also help you to be more effective and efficient. Who does not want their staff to be more effective and efficient? If your staff are more effective, more efficient, means they're more productive, means that you're making more money. Who doesn't want to make more money? I don't hear anybody saying, not me. So let's look at that. You could make things more streamlined. You also have the pro of influencing behavior. So what are some of the reasons why we want to expand our PSA system? So let's take a look at those. Some of the typical reasons for expansion are to keep users informed. We might need reminders. I don't like to say, but we all get older, and I like whenever those schedule reminders come up because I can get heads down in my work and forget that I have something going on later today. So it's very important to me to get reminders. I really, really need reminders in my life today. The other thing is it can automate data entry. That's a really good reason for expansion. Who doesn't like automation? There are pros and cons to automation, I will forewarn you. The same way with automating field population. You also could have expansion to validate data entry. Are they putting the correct data in there? Are they just putting junk in there so that they can get to the next step? And it also can help enforce policy compliance. Who wouldn't want to expand their PSA system to do all this? Well, you might say, well, keeping your users informed would work for me, but I really don't want to have automated field population. Well, that's the great thing about PSA extensions. You don't have to choose all of them. You might just need one of them. So anything here could actually assist you. There's also a lot more out there that you could use expansions for. You might have something in your system that doesn't allow you to track a specific piece of your environment or your daily tasks that you want to make sure that you're able to track that information. None of us want to go back to Excel. So we always want to look for expansions that can help us keep us in one centralized location and help us grow as a company. Be more effective and efficient. That's what we want to be, effective and efficient. So what are some ways to keep users informed? So let's be honest. Informing is typically through emails, which we get a lot every day. I know people who get 1,000 new emails a day. How can you ever get through that? Let's be honest, that's just 1,000 in their inbox. They have like 2,000 in their spam folder. I can't believe that. That's just ridiculous. But it's for their day-to-day work, and that's one thing that they've got to live with. So those are some things that you have to make sure that if you're sending out email reminders, you want to make sure it's clear. It's a call to action. It's having them do something. If you don't do this, we won't get this. You want to make sure that you're not overloading them with emails. Don't send one a day. You might want to send one a week unless it's something that's very important. You want to make sure that you're customizing the content. Nobody wants a, hey you, forgot blah, blah, blah. You want to make sure it's like, Dear Diana, you need to make sure that you do X, Y, and Z because you only entered X, Y. You didn't enter X, Y, and Z. So some of the things that you might want to look at is being proactive. How can this help my company? In the PSA world, you know that we all need timesheets. Almost all of us are T&M or fixed fee. So we want to make sure that our staff is informed of what's going on with our project. Let's be honest, PMs juggle multiple projects. They might have a team that's putting time in. They're able to look at it, but they're not really high on their priority list to make sure everything's going. With the budget? How's it going? So one thing that you can do is you can proactively build alerts to let your project manager know where you are with the budget. You can also, same thing, proactive alert to let them know that their margin has gone below what your average margin is. One of the big things that we have, though, is timesheets. Let's be honest. How many people need a reminder to put in their timesheet? Well, it happens to me occasionally because I get heads down, I'm doing all my work, but I forget that my timesheet is due on Mondays at 12 o'clock, and it's Monday and it's 12:05, and I've gotten an email reminding me that, you know, we really need to do this so that we can bill our clients for our time. One thing to also make sure of is that you're providing links in your emails. So the last thing I want to see is to tell me that, you know, XYZ project is over budget, but you don't give me a link to that project. So make your emails effective and efficient by including all of the necessary information. The client's name, the project name, the start date, the relevant information about this email, and a link to that actual project. Everybody wants that information. You can also provide links on training. So let's say you're sending out that timesheet email and somebody doesn't know how to enter timesheets. You could always give them a link to how to enter a timesheet if you have that information available. Because, you know, if you do not give them informational messages, where does it go? It goes to file 13, which is the lovely trash can. So you want to make sure that you're doing the most effective and efficient communications to your staff. You're not bombarding them. You're not overloading them with information. You're giving them the beneficial information to keep your staff informed and keep your company running on pace. Some of the other things that you might want to look at is automating data entry. So effective expansion can result in data entry time saving. Who doesn't want to save time? The one thing we have to remember is that there are still data dependencies. You always need to validate your information and audit it periodically, and you need to review for updates as your business changes. So you might be saying, well, what might you automate? Well, you might automate billing, but you have a data dependency on your bill rates. If your bill rates aren't correct, then your billings are not going to be correct. Because Susie put in 10 hours, your billing was $150 whenever it should have been $200. You are losing out on money. So you have to go back, and sometimes undoing the automation is not as easy as making the automation run. So one thing you got to remember is you got to update your business changes. Same way with cost rates. Cost rates change, let's be honest. Every employee usually gets a yearly evaluation. That means that most of the time they get raises, or you have a yearly incremental increase in your pay for inflation. So that means that your cost rates have changed. So you want to make sure that you're controlling that data. Integrations may propagate data errors to other systems, causing more administrative nightmares than benefits. So if you have one system talking to another system through an integration, and your original system that's automating that data is not correct, now you not only have one system to correct, you have 2 or 3 systems to correct. So it's very important to fix these issues quickly, make sure that your data is maintained, make sure that you have automated data entry. So, you know, the data entry that might occur is these billing events. You can also schedule things if you're using Salesforce and FinancialForce. You could schedule utilization, you can schedule backlog, you can do all kinds of automated data entry, which could then flow to another system, such as an HR system to tell them what is the utilization for that person. So a lot of this automated data entry, you need to make sure that you have the correct data underlying the information. So don't forget about your underlying information. The next thing that we might want to look at is auto field population. Well, what could we do there? We could automate the field population to ensure that the high data accuracy quality and reduce maintenance. So what are some considerations? Well, we need to accommodate for exceptions. The last thing that somebody wants is to come to you and say, I cannot do this, or, if it's a manual override, they might just not even do it. So you need to make sure that you have exceptions to your rules in place for automation of fields. You also want to validate your information and audit periodically. You also want to review for updates in your business changes. So what are some default fields? So you could have some required fields that may require that you enter something, but that doesn't mean that your person actually chose the correct one. So if this project stage or status is set to pre-sales, what if nobody changes that? Always going to be set to pre-sales because it's required. Well, it's got something in there. That's how defaults can be bad for a system. So some of the examples that I've had with defaults is project status, project health. Because it's set to green and nobody updates it. I've seen that happen a lot. You're looking at that and you're like, what in the world? I knew that the PM said that the client's upset about this, but it says that their health is green. It's because nobody has changed the default values. Because they just see it there and they're just like, oh, we're going to keep on going. The other one that is very, very, that causes an issue quite often is timesheets. We have that button on our timesheets where it says populate from last week or populate from schedule. And they just push that button and then hit submit. It's really not what they worked on. It's really not what they did. But the information that they're putting in there is something to get past because they don't really care. They're just pushing that button. So one thing that you might want to do with timesheets is make sure if you're giving them that availability to press that button, that you're actually using Audit Track, that you're tracking it. You're going in on a weekly or monthly basis as a manager. You're making sure that that information is correct. They're not just pressing that button every week, not putting in new notes. They're still using everything that was previously there. That is one thing that you really, really want to look at is make sure that there's a way that they can press the button, but making sure that you're not overcharging your client. You're not just putting in something in there to put it in there. You want to make sure that you have correct automated data. So what about validating data entries? I wonder what we could do here. So we can actually add some logic to validate data entry, which is typically intended for increased data accuracy. Who does not want data accuracy? I certainly do. So it all sounds great, right? But there might be some unintended consequences. So let's take a look at those. So one of those things is I can put in whatever. The system will correct it. We all have that attitude some days, like, whatever happens, it happens. We think that everything will be corrected by the system because it's smarter than us. We can have end user frustration because it says that I have to enter this, it has to be valid, but that's not the correct option. This client's an exception. How can I get around this and this exception? I want this fixed, but I don't have time to run to my manager to get it fixed. What am I going to do? The other thing is bad data entry to past validation checks. I've seen this one quite frequently. So what do you do? The field's required due to this because that's a validation rule. So what am I going to do to get around that? Well, I'm just going to put in a period. I'm just going to type the word fine. I'm just going to put in okay. So for an example, the description's required. The person just types okay. Did the validation rules say that that wasn't okay? No. They passed through it and it went completely through. But is this valid data? No. Just because you're validating your data entry does not mean that it's smart enough to know that in the description field, writing okay is okay with you as a business. It's not okay. We need to make sure that we have the correct data. So people just going in there and typing in things, you do need to do audit checks on this type of information also. You want to make sure that this information is correct and accurate. If you don't have good, accurate data, if you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out, and nobody wants garbage out. This is the same way with the other item, that you can have integration. So not only do you have bad data in your PSA system, you now have bad data in your accounting system, your HR system, or whatever system you're connected to, and nobody wants that. The other thing about having inaccurate data is the fact that you're not the only one using the system. Sales might be looking at that. So if you're just typing in garbage, you're not going to have any of that information correct. Nobody wants to have inaccurate information. You do not want to put in just something to put it in there. You want to make sure that you're putting in the most valid information that you know at the time, and you want to keep that data accurate, because just because it's in there today does not mean that it's good there tomorrow. One of the things is status or stage on a project, let's be honest. As the project's going through the stages, are you making sure you're updating those at the appropriate times? Same way with health. Are you updating that? Is that the correct information in that system? Nobody knows that but you as the PM or you as the manager. So if you're having weekly meetings with your PMs, make sure that they're entering the correct data and they're keeping it up to date. The other thing is to enforce policy compliance. So policy compliance ensures timely data capture for reporting and operational management. The other thing that it does is it pushes off data. Sometimes compliance is needed in order to trigger other things coming down the pike. Let's say billing, you want to make sure that you're invoicing your clients on time. The last thing you want is to not have time cards in there so you can't bill out your clients. So whenever you're implementing this, something that needs to be a factor is that we're working with humans. We're not artificial intelligence. We're not all computers. We need to make sure that we're compliant. So some of the things that you might want to expand your policy compliance with or audits is timesheets, project budgets, resource scheduling. Let's be honest. How many of you are keeping up with your resource schedules? If you're not keeping up with your resource scheduling, how can your estimates versus actuals be legit? If you say you're going to schedule this person if you're using a 0 hours schedule policy, which is saying they're going to work 0 hours every day, and you're actually having that person work 10 hours a day on that project, your estimates versus actuals is never going to be right. So it's going to look like that person's overworked all the time. You're not going to know what's on the schedule, so you need to make sure that that's correct. Some other things to think about is that more automation means less thinking. So do we really want that from our staff? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing in relation to this expansion? Avoid "this is right" presentations for populating data for adjustments. So is this right? Do I want to, we don't want to look at that and consider what could go wrong with the data. Anytime we put an integration in, your data could be messed up somehow. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the data, considering it accurate and efficient as possible. Again, dirty data in, dirty data out. Compliancy. If you don't have your time cards in, how can you report on your business efficiency, on your operations team, on your estimates versus actuals? How can you make sure that things are actually happening the way that they should be? You need to make sure that your budgets are accurate. So if you have an additional SOW for your change order, are you adjusting your budget? Are you creating a new project? How are you keeping track of that? Are you using hierarchy projects? You want to make sure that everything is in the system. It is audited, because everybody knows that auditor comes around once a year, but you should be keeping your data and your compliancy in place. You might have compliancy for expense reports to make sure that receipts are within a certain time frame. So somebody can't wait a year to expense a $100 item because you're no longer working with that client. So it's got to be within that time frame. Again, the biggest one is timesheets, to make sure that you're compliant with timesheets. You know, we all get that weekly email if you miss your timesheet to say you got to put it in. There's some really cool timesheet reminders out there. Some of them tell you if you missed an assignment. Others tell you if you didn't put in 40 hours. So those are some cool things to look at. Next, so last but not least, let's just summarize what we talked about today. So some technology expansions that will make sense when data entry is minimized, the accuracy is increased, and it keeps users informed and compliant. Who does not want their users informed and compliant? Everybody. That would make life so much easier if everybody would just do everything whenever they're supposed to and do everything the way that it's supposed to be done. That doesn't happen. We're all humans. We all make mistakes. We all mess up. So we want to make sure that we have that information completed. The next thing is automation is not equal to human replacement. You know, we have AI coming into the system all the time. People are talking about it. You know, we're going more digital. We're less interactive as humans. But you've got to remember that it can make a mistake. If you're using automation, it can make a mistake. So make sure you're validating your logic and your data periodically. Consider that humans might do something that would change or affect your automation. And you also want to make sure that you're customizing your logic as your business grows and as your vendors continue to release software. I cannot say it enough that you need to make sure that you're testing out your expansions and customizations whenever any release is coming out. So if you're on FinancialForce, that means you got to test it with Salesforce releases and FinancialForce. If you're on NetSuite OpenAir, you got to test it out with whenever OpenAir is releasing. If you're using an integration, you need to make sure that your integrations aren't going to break. Anything that you're customizing, make sure that it's not only that it's going to grow with your business, but as your business is expanding, you're able to tweak it and make sure that it's not set. For those 10 employees that you had this year, but you have 200 next year, that same situation or customization might not work for that. So you might have to look into updating it or replacing it with something that will handle your situation.